Atheist Alliance International Podcast.
I don't make this stuff up.
You know, if you put Jesus Christ first, that he'll look after all your bills.
It's not fake, it's faith.
Hi, and welcome to the latest episode of the Atheist Alliance International Podcast. I am your host, Jason Sylvester. Today, I'm joined by three members of the Clergy Project. For those of you who are unaware of the Clergy Project, it was started by Freedom from Religious Foundation to help ministers, priests, and clergy who are in the calling, who are having doubts. Many of them become atheists. Some of them are just searching and questioning. And so the Freedom from Religion Foundation set up the Clergy Project. So we're joined here by Ken, John, and Scott, who are all from three different backgrounds. So I will turn it over to them and let them give an introduction. So Ken, why don't you go first and tell us a little bit about yourself?
Sure. Son of a Lutheran pastor, was raised in a Lutheran church, and a specific kind of it. I was in the pietistic background from Norway, which is a very, very conservative and kind of preaches that what you have to do to be a Christian in the world. That always gets into what I call the carrot and stick, what you got to do to get into heaven. Okay. And don't piss God off. Try to make him happy. And I never quite felt good about that. It was understood from the time I was young that I would become pastor like my father. That's where I was shepherded all through my 19 years, and I kind of figured that's where it's going to be. My heart was in nature education. So college size, I kind of left for a while, and then I just took a sojourn out in the Northwest. I had seen that movie Jeremiah Johnson, and I was gone. And kind of lived that sort of life for a while. And then made the decision to come back and work at a church camp. Met my wife there. She's my better 4/5. And we got married, and I moved to California to do some environmental education work with churches. At that time, I still harbored the idea that we didn't have to go the Jim Watt route. We needed more oil, God would make it. That kind of baloney that I was hearing politically at that particular time during the Reagan administration. Wanted to counteract that. And got kind of what here I call the Virginia nice syndrome. That's nice. But no real action, no real response. Decided to go to seminary. And when I graduated, I thought, I hope my mother is finally happy. Then I went to one parish in Vermont. I decided I wanted to get back into this outdoor ministry, which I did. And through all of that, I learned ecology, biology. That was my real love, forestry. And I began to see, you know, nature really doesn't care. There's no sense of love there. And this church that preaches God thinks that this is irredeemably bad as a way to excuse their responsibility for taking care of this wonderful present. It really began to grate on me. And shortly after the millennium, I started reading what I said was the triumvirate of Hitchens, Harris, and Dawkins. Really just to kind of find out why they were upset with Christianity. And I found them enormously persuasive. And I began to think that way, observing my congregation. I saw the distance between what the person Jesus did was getting way different from what the church was saying and doing. I saw a Facebook post the other day, I'm tired of people with a mouth full of scripture and a heart full of hate. And I just kept probing this with therapists, and it kept getting worse. They all wanted to restore me to some kind of a faith, and I just couldn't do that. Along the way, my mother died, and I saw a side of my father that I had never seen before. And I thought, he doesn't believe this shit any more than I do. And I kind of started on a downward slide, and it ended up one time I was with the therapist, and I said, you know, I was crying. I said, I don't have the God I thought I had. I don't have the Father I had. I don't think I have the faith that I had. And he says, what are you going to do about it? And I said, I'm going to go load my hunting rifle and blow my fucking head off. And he said, well, maybe you want to abandon the therapy. So I was in lockdown there for about 5 weeks. Had a lot of time to think, and it began to be more and more clear to me that I cannot sustain this belief in the supernatural, particularly the one that was exercised so much shame and guilt in my personal life. So I kind of went out of that and then went on a good deal of antidepressants. And then, kind of went back to the parish with the idea that I really don't believe this stuff, but I'm almost 30 years in. I'm almost to pension time. For whatever it is, I made a pragmatic action to stay in the ministry, preach humanistically, as much as I could get away with, and retire at age 60 and get that pension. I'm not saying that was right, wrong. It was what I needed to do at the time. And since then, I've been involved with the Clergy Project. Actually, I was before I left the ministry. Actually served as secretary for them at one time, but my damn ears aren't very good. I couldn't hear anybody online during COVID. So I have kind of just come to the grips. I feel wonderful that there's not this supernatural being watching over my father. I do better without a father, either spiritual or here. My eyes are open to the wonders of each day at life, not worrying about future so much, but engaging. And as I said before, I learned some things by my wife. She helps people not to gain entrance to heaven or to avoid hell, which is most of what my parishioners wanted. But she does it to see people smile. A decidedly humanist, although she is a believer. And I found that that's really what I wanted to do. More humanistic, do it just because it helps people. And I've tried to do that ever since being out of the ministry.
Great.
A little long-winded.
Yeah, no, that's fine. Okay, so just to give everybody a quick background, so we actually have the three gentlemen we have joining us are all actually from three different faiths. So Ken is a Lutheran, John is a Catholic, Scott is a Seventh-day Adventist. John, though, is the first to join us on the podcast who is not from the ministry, but is was a monk, part of a cloistered community. So very keen to hear John's experience on this, as I've never spoken to a monk before, or former monk. So quite interested. So John, thank you, and looking forward to hearing your story and your journey.
Okay. So you may pick up from my accent that I'm originally from England, where I was born and brought up. I was brought up in the Church of England, but when I was 19, I converted to Catholicism. And at the age of 22, I entered a Benedictine monastery in England. And just to correct you, Jason, I was not only a monk, but I was also a priest, because I was ordained as a priest within the monastery. And it was, when I entered the monastery, I was very conservative and very committed to my faith and my belief in the supernatural. It was actually my study of theology that began me on the path towards what now I regard as myself as effectively an atheist. I remember I was sent to study by my abbot, sent to study theology in a Jesuit school, and the principal of the college, when he met with the freshman class, he said, when you came here, you thought it would be all your questions answered. Instead, and I found that to be the truth in my study of theology, and I began to become more liberal in my theology, more open, and eventually, anyway, I was ordained I was still obviously a Catholic. I was still obviously a monk. But I had lots of questions. I asked my abbot if I could go out and become out of the monastery and become a university chaplain, which I did. I worked in 2 universities in England as university chaplain, and eventually I left the monastery and became a diocesan priest in England. Then I asked my bishop if I could come to the United States and work, and I was given permission to do that, and I worked in high school campus ministry, and eventually, for all sorts of reasons, not least because I met my now husband, I decided to leave the church, and I'm giving you the very potted version. Like Ken, I was very influenced by the writings of Richard Dawkins, Christopher Hitchens, Sam Harris, Carl Sagan, more recently Robert Sapolsky, and other academics who have been a great influence upon my life. Richard Dawkins, I think, was one of the more influential writers, and through his, I became aware of the Clergy Project, and eventually joined the Clergy Project, and have been since asked that if I would screen Catholic clergy members who are wanting to join the online forum, and I do that for them. I don't know whether I could go into a lot of details about my faith journey, but today I am, to all intents and purposes, an atheist. I guess you could say I'm an agnostic, but I do not believe in the supernatural. I see no reason to believe or postulate a God to explain any human phenomena. And as Christopher Hitchens said, extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence. And I believe that the problem with religion is that it favors faith over reason. And when you do that, then we lose all sense of common language, because everybody is locked into their own little hermetically sealed religious belief, and they only believe what encourages or fosters their own belief. And if you buy into the dogma that there is a God and that God has revealed him or herself through revelation, then you're going to I think you have real problems intellectually and with any type of honesty. And so religious belief, and it doesn't matter to me what religious belief you come from, all of them will only work for you as long as you buy into the fundamental tenets. Then it works as a sort of a sealed off set of reasoning. But for me, I can no longer buy into that. After I left Catholicism, I toyed with other denominations. I toyed with going back to the Episcopal Church. I toyed with the United Church of Christ, which I think is a very beautiful community, very liberal-minded. But in the end, I decided it wasn't the church that I had the problem with; it was with God. And the God that I had believed in no longer met my needs. I had outgrown God, and that rather than God making humankind in his own image, I think that we made God in our own image, and that what we need to do is to find liberation from that way of thinking. And now I am an atheist. After leaving the priesthood and the monastery, I went back to school and became and got my PhD in clinical psychology, and have for many years now been working as a clinical psychologist in Southern California.
Great, thank you for that. So made a couple of points to come back to. And our third guest is Scott, who was involved with the Seventh-day Adventists. So Scott, we'll turn it over to you to introduce yourself.
Thank you. I actually grew up as a Lutheran. I wasn't a very committed Lutheran. My parents weren't too committed. It was just one of those things that you did on Sunday. I do remember, though, working as like one of the candlelighters in the church. So obviously I had some kind of fascination with it even at that early age, maybe around age 8 or 9 or something like that. But then I just kind of left it. My parents, maybe they just stopped going to church. They had divorced, and I don't remember going to church after about age 11 or 12 or something like that, and went out on my own, and we moved and such. And anyways, I was in California, just to kind of speed things up. I was in California. I was actually skating as a professional there, and I invited some friends of mine to come stay with me. I was renting a trailer. And anyways, so they were working at a car wash, and a black gentleman there who worked as a shoe shiner guy. He was actually a Seventh-day Adventist. So he started introducing them to Seventh-day Adventist. And Adventists are very interested in eschatology and end-time events, Revelation and the book of Daniel and things of that sort. So it was really very fascinating and very exciting material to study. And I just fell for it. After about just 6 months of us studying, I was in California. We all moved back to Tucson, which is kind of where I was before I moved to California. And all three of us actually went to a college, an Adventist college in Texas. I was the only one that finished out the course. I earned a degree in religion after about 4 years there. And I got a call as an associate pastor in Des Moines, Iowa. But that didn't last long. That lasted about 3 months. As I look back, I started having some very serious questions even before I finished college. There were just things that I saw, some problems that I saw, but I went ahead and finished it out. I got a call. I thought I'd go ahead and try it out as an associate pastor, and then found that I just could not basically get paid for it. I wasn't in a situation like a lot of TCP members are, where they've been in the church, they've been pastoring for 20 or 30 years, and they're a few years away from being able to retire. I was just able to kind of cut loose from it. But I did still work in the church. I did still work in the church for about 10 more years after that, working as a lay pastor, doing a little preaching. But I eventually had to cut ties with it. So I was actually an agnostic for about 14 years, up until about the year 2002 or something like that. I guess just trying to ask any possible questions that I could ask, just trying to get over all of the, the things that I was looking for, trying to find what I was looking for in life. So I have been actually an atheist since about 2004 is when I kind of pinpoint that. And that is kind of my story in a nutshell.
You were mentioning, Scott, that you were questioning while you were in school. So did you consider yourself an agnostic while you were practicing as a lay pastor, or the agnosticism sort of came after you cut ties?
The agnosticism would have come later. I was still quite a believer at that point in time. I had studied so much before I went to college. I thought I knew everything. I don't know if John and Ken can relate to this, but I went to school thinking I knew everything, that I knew the truth. But as soon as I got there and got immersed in theology and religion, I started to realize that there's 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 thousands of gods that are out there, and tens of thousands of different denominations. So it was a very humbling experience for me. And so that began the doubt process for me that my religion was not the truth, that I had to start thinking about religion and God in a much broader way.
And so, Scott, you told us why you converted. So, John, what about you? Was there something that prompted you to join Catholicism from Church of England, or you didn't find the Church of England was meeting your spiritual needs? Or
well, in the Church of England, I had become very involved with the High Church movement, which is very similar to Catholicism in its doctrines and beliefs. And at that time, I was very conservative. I was very worried about the possible ordination of women. There were all sorts of worries if you were involved in the High Church Anglo-Catholic movement. Nowadays, I'm very committed to a more feminist approach, but in those days, I was a very spiky young man, very traditional sort of Englishman, very conservative by nature and personality, shall we say. And in some ways I still am. I'm not, what you could might call a radical hippie type. I'm just so at the time, the reasons why I converted to Catholicism were later the reasons why I left it, because of its absolute commitment to defining the truth. And I do identify with Scott when he said, I thought I knew it all when I was 19. But it was surprising how much I discovered I didn't know by the time I was 25.
Yeah, I've come across the point, and maybe Dan and Scott and John, I've seen Daniel Dennett has said it in a paper. I think Bart Ehrman has said it. I read it again just somewhere recently, that you come into your seminary training and you're basically taught all of this historical critical background to the church, and then they make a choice to then conceal that. Did the three of you find that you were learning all of this historical critical methodologies in seminary, and it was a bit shocking for you?
Well,
anybody?
Shocking, eye-opening for me. I mean,
eye-opening.
Great. I love the research into some of these background, all of the texts, but I do remember one seminary professor saying to me, I can't believe that any graduate of seminary still believes that Jesus was bodily resurrected from the dead. So I got the more metaphorical aspects of, particularly biblical scholarship. I wasn't impressed with Lutheran theology.
Yeah. I think this is sorry, Ken. I think this is where the God of the gaps comes in. Yeah. I think you go into seminary and you realize that you're like somebody painting the floor, and you're moving into a smaller and smaller part of the floor that's not painted. And that's when you realize, and especially as a priest, you realize every Sunday when you recite the creed, you think to yourself, what I believe about the words I'm saying is not what the congregation are believing about the words they're saying. And you have to dissociate yourself. You have to cut off part of yourself into this believing, saying the words, but not really believing the words that you're saying. Right. I was watching an interview just recently with Richard Dawkins, and the bishop of the Primus Bishop of the Episcopal Church. I've forgotten his name, and he's very much involved in what in England was called the Sea of Faith, over here in the United States, Bishop Spong was very much part of that, where they really don't believe in Christianity as traditionally interpreted. They have so interpreted Christianity as to be left into a very small space, the God of the gaps. And I think that as much as I respect those people, I think there's a certain amount of intellectual dishonesty that is required to remain as part of a religious institution when you no longer believe what the majority of people within that institution are claiming to believe.
Yeah, your point about the Catholic Church wanting to be all about the truth. I'm currently writing a section. I'm working on a book on the history of secularism, atheism, also history of the Catholic Church. And I'm doing Vatican II right now, and I'm going through the documents from Vatican II, particularly the ones where they're talking about freedom of religion, engaging with the other denominations and faiths around the world. And yet, repeatedly, it comes up in these Vatican declarations of the truth of Catholicism, just over and over and over again. The one on freedom of religion was updated in 2019 by Pope Francis. And I did a text search on it, and the word Christian and church comes up over 80 times each in a document talking about freedom of religion. And yet it just comes back to the church is the one true religion. And I was gobsmacked. So anyway, one point just for me anyway, our viewers might not care so much, but I'm interested. So John, you said you were both a monk and a priest. So is that fairly common that those that are in monasteries are also priests, or it's just a very small percentage that are both monks and priests?
It depends on the monastic order, but most monastic orders, I would say the majority of the monks eventually get ordained as priests. In monasteries which don't have any pastoral work, like schools or parishes or chaplaincies or things like that, then where they're predominantly agricultural communities, like the Cistercian monks, the Trappists, they tend to have less priests probably. Although the majority of the monks in most monasteries eventually become priests.
Okay. I just from my research, it sounded like in the past that there's pretty much two separate worlds. You had the monks in their corner, and you had the priests over here. And you hear about like the dissolution of the monasteries in England, but it happened all over Europe, and I cover that in my book as well. And one of the biggest points that comes up in country after country when they were dissolving the monasteries was that the monasteries were pretty much parasites. They weren't doing anything. Like, they were doing very little pastoral work. They were doing, they're basically parasites on the surrounding agricultural community that they had to turn over produce to support these brothers. So that came up. So it sounds one of the monasteries that were allowed to survive were the ones that were like the nuns that were teaching in schools or providing healthcare. So it sounds like the monastic tradition has sort of evolved in the modern age. That I guess they kind of realized they needed to be more than just cloistered and self-reflection, that they have to be also to be priests and go out there and doing some pastoral work. So it sounds like. So how long were you a monk? It sounds like you left the monastery fairly quickly. So were you a monk for just a short period?
No, I was a monk from 1980 through till about 90. Let me think. For about mid 90s.
Okay.
Yeah. Until I came to the just before I came to the United States. So until about 93. So I was about 13 years a monk. And the monks in medieval times in England were huge involved with people. They ran farms, they ran villages, they were great landowners. It's not quite as clear as you say that they were totally cloistered. They were very much involved with the daily life of the medieval people. Then they were dissolved by Henry VIII And the community to which I belonged, there were three. The monks then moved over to France, where they established English communities before they came back to England in the 19th century.
So it sounds like the only one who had a full career here was Ken, who had a full career in the ministry. So John and Scott, it sounds like both of you guys got out well before your retirement. Ken was the only one who served all the way through. John, sounds like you were questioning right from the beginning. So maybe you guys can talk a little bit about the beginnings of how you were questioning. So Ken, you haven't spoken in a while, so maybe you can talk a little bit about when it first started, the questioning and the doubt started festering in your mind.
Ken? Yeah. Early on, I mean, when I was a kid, I saw the disjoint between what the Bible was saying. You know, you get punished for any of the smallest of sins. I went through a whole 6th grade thinking I had leprosy. And, it was just that kind of thing that started early on. And as I described, when a capstone to this, I just couldn't believe in anything supernatural anymore. One of the critical books, and I think my two colleagues there have referred somewhat to this, is that when I left the ministry, I knew people who were really salt of the earth types. And I was very persuaded by Greta Vospa's book, With or Without God. I said, I'm an atheist, non-theist, whatever you want to call it. I'm not yet an anti-theist. And I still kind of hope, particularly in my area, that there can be some kind of linkage between this idea of with or without God, it's your behavior that counts. And how are we doing good for humanity, for the earth? And I recognize that within the theist camp, there's a lot of folks who live up to it. But I'm getting closer to the point where I'm non-theist, because you see all this crap around there. Frankly, I think we could wipe out the American deficit if we just simply taxed the churches.
Perhaps.
And Scott or John, one of you like to discuss your beginnings of doubt?
I think for me, it started in college, because when I remember positing some questions to my instructors about our own faith and our own religion, and I discovered that they didn't really believe it either. They were just kind of going through the motions themselves, and I think one thing that's been really opens my eyes is that you can walk into a church today and you can ask the person on the left what they think about God, what they think about their religion, ask the person on the right, and everybody's going to believe something that is just completely different. And if you expand that out, nobody believes the same thing in the world. But the problem with Christianity is that if you have something like the Holy Spirit, this agency that is supposed to be leading everybody to the truth, it's leading nobody to the truth, which kind of tells you that there's no such thing as this divine agency that leads everybody in the same direction. If anything, it's just complete chaos. But I do think that people that are in religions, we were talking about here just a second ago, I think by and large, people are involved with religions because they want to be good people. They want to be better people. I think the case could be made, though, that sometimes you have to leave religion to actually be a better person. That's certainly one of the reasons that I left. I thought I could be a more whole person and a better person. And so.
Yeah.
Okay, great. Thank you for that. And John, maybe talk a little bit about you.
Yeah, like I said, my questioning began when I began to study academic theology. And it's been a gradual process ever since. There came a point at which I realized that I really didn't believe any of the supernatural stuff. I was more in the Bishop Spong camp, and I remained there for a while. But it's very difficult because your whole life revolves around the church. And you realize that giving up your faith means giving up this community that you're a part of. And it was difficult when I eventually made that decision to leave, because, all my friends that I knew, all the communities I belonged to, everything was now different. And I had to find a new life beyond Catholicism, beyond belief. And eventually you find that. You find new communities, you find new people who are more able to feed you, if you like, spiritually. Now I don't believe that, building on what Ken was saying, Scott was saying, I don't think that atheists have a monopoly on being good people. There are good people in all religions and none. I just believe that if you're a good person, you're able to sort out those things within your religion that are not good. And there are plenty of non-good things in all the religions, and people who are atheists are not necessarily always good. So we have to make choices for ourselves. I also, as I think I mentioned Robert Sapolsky and also Sam Harris, I'm not a believer in free will. I don't believe that we have a choice. I think that everything is determined, but not predictable. And so believe that I don't condemn people who are religious. I just no longer find it intellectually or spiritually satisfying to believe in a supernatural deity or angels or demons or the spiritual world.
Okay. And so when you three were coming out, so John, you mentioned you do some screening with the Clergy Project. Ken, you mentioned, I think you said you were a secretary for the Clergy Project. Scott, have you been involved in volunteering with the Clergy Project at all, or did you go to them?
I can't remember how I discovered them. I must have just kind of stumbled across them, or maybe somebody suggested to them. And this would have been about 4 years ago. And it's been an extremely good resource. So they just asked me to serve as the treasurer. So I've been stepped into that role. So
okay. So when you were starting to leave your faith, so one of the things I want to sort of be like a cheerleader for the Clergy Project and what they're doing, so we can get this information out there for others who were in the situation you gentlemen found yourself in, that there is resources out there. So Ken, I think you said you started about 5 years before you retired. You kind of reached out. So maybe you guys you can just talk a little bit about what the Clergy Project did for you when you were still in the ministry, and so we can kind of convey to people who might be questioning the kind of help that is available that you guys got.
I think first of all, I was going through intellectually and more emotionally, I'm more interested in behavior. And it just put me in touch with other people that were, wow, you're not alone. And that was the big thing for me. I figured, and I'm wrong. I gotta be. Nobody else believes this. So it was a big part of my growth in that way. They also put me on to the religious trauma syndrome, and there's groups that deal with that. And I finally, nail in the coffin for me on faith was that now I know what happened to me. And that was a good find that came through the Clergy Project. I was very enthusiastic. I would write stuff. But I can't hear well. They had me secretary, and I did do a grant writing with the Freedom from Religion to get them some money to serve the ones who needed psychological therapy help upon leaving that. I had already been through that, and it was just a matter of finding people of like mind. Yeah,
that's important for our community. I think that's what a lot of I hear from a lot of atheists that the people who post on our Facebook page or who write into us, one of the biggest things for the atheists, especially the ex-Muslims, many of whom are still living in Muslim societies, and they're terrified. But to know there's a community out there, that you're not alone, is huge. So okay, and John, you mentioned you do counseling, but do you do counseling for the Clergy Project as well, or are you completely separate?
I don't do counseling for the Clergy Project. No. As I say, I'm a screener for those who are Catholic clergy who are wanting to join the online forum, and we screen them before they come in, because there are some people in the religious communities who would like access to the forum because they want to expose people. And there are a lot of people within the forum who are still in active ministry, and people of all religions. I've spoken to people who are still in very active positions within the Catholic Church, and sometimes quite high and high-profile positions within the Catholic Church, but no longer believe the religion that they're part of. And now some of us have left, but there are a lot of people in the Clergy Project who are still in active ministry, who are just wanting to be intellectually honest and meet with like-minded people who have been in ministry and within paid or professional ministry positions, and want to talk and support one another. And I think that it is both an open forum and yet also a guarded forum, because we also have to protect these people, some of them, from the extreme religion who want to perhaps expose them.
I think it was one of the Clergy Project people that once said we have a number of Muslims, and one of the Muslims remarked, "If you come out, you lose your job. If I come out, I lose my head."
Yeah,
yeah,
exactly.
Yeah. So, John, you're a screener for the Clergy Project, but did you go to the Clergy Project when you were sort of coming out of the priesthood?
No, I was well out by then, and I came across the Clergy Project partly because of my admiration for Richard Dawkins, and I thought if this is an organization that's founded by Richard, or he was one of the founders of the Clergy Project, it's got to be a good organization, and I fit the profile, and I thought I would join. But I was, by that time, I've been out a lot. I've been out of ministry since '97, so long time. And for me, it's I see it as my way of giving back to people who may be struggling with their faith or lack of it.
I was going to
go ahead, Scott.
I was going to add, I felt very similar to you, John. I had been out a long time, and so I thought, well, maybe I can contribute to that, because it just takes it's a long process in getting out of religion and leaving all of those beliefs behind. And I think the Clergy Project has about 12,000 members to it right now, and I got a feeling there's a lot more people out there that need this kind of a resource. I mean, I think personally, I think everybody's doubting all the time, but certainly if you're in the ministry, you're doubting all the time too. And one thing I've noticed with the Clergy Project is you're going to find this spectrum of people from all the way out, and they can say anything they want to say. They have that freedom to do that. I mean, I feel like I'm in that position because it's no longer linked to my life or anything, and then you have people that are just kind of entering that process. So if for those that are out there looking for that resource, they're going to find compatible people to talk with and stories. And that's just extremely important to know that there are other people out there that have gone through that experience, and that can assist you in going through it.
Right. And just correct me if I'm wrong, but the Clergy Project itself does not provide counseling. The people like Darrell Ray and the Secular Therapy Project, they have these counselors. So I'm presuming that most of the clergy go to them. They're not getting it. They're not getting it internally from the Clergy Project. You're being referred to something like Secular Therapy Project.
I think so.
That as a secretary, because I wrote to the grant to Freedom from Religion Foundation, because we were finding that those counselors were getting scarce because they weren't getting full money. That people would give what they could, but a lot of these pastors, they're on their own. So the Clergy Project now does provide some, at least they were when I was secretary, providing these subsidies to make it more attractive for the therapists to do work, and also for the clergy people to get the therapy.
Yeah. So, John, in your clinical therapy, are you dealing with religious trauma, or do you stay away from that altogether, or that's your focus? Or
well, some years ago, with a colleague of mine, we wanted to set up a group which we called Soul Source for dealing with people with religious trauma. Alas, we got no takers. And I think that that's partly because there's an awful lot of fear involved in leaving religion. And I think for a lot of people, like Ken and Scott have both said, it's a gradual process. And it's not something that you come to overnight. And it's not just a question of an intellectual decision. You're leaving a community that maybe has been very nurturing, supportive, and loving towards you in lots of ways. And suddenly you're faced with the prospect of not just giving up these intellectual ideas of theism, but also you're giving up a community. And that can be very fearful for people. So I have had people that I've seen for therapy who are dealing with religious trauma. I've been very much following a lot of podcasts recently on YouTube of the Mormon Church, which I think in recent years has been going through tremendous trauma because of what's called the CES letter. And I so totally identify with so many of the things. To me, Mormonism, just on its face, is bizarre. But I do understand how people who, especially those who are born into it, find it very difficult to leave, because it is a very high demand religion, but at the same time is very culturally supportive.
And there is also a shunning religion. So when you leave,
exactly,
you're cut off.
And I feel so sorry for them, because those people, and there's many of them now on the internet. You know, there's I think the Mormon Church is undergoing a real trauma at the moment.
Yeah, and you mentioned having a husband, so obviously you had become a monk and a priest in a church that condemns homosexuality. So, are you okay to discuss what that was like to live in a cloistered community and to be homosexual?
Well, I think I can only speak from my experience. My experience was that there were many gay people in the clergy, the Catholic clergy. No, let me correct that. The way I say it is that there are many homosexual clergy. There are very few gay. And I make a distinction because I think being gay implies celebration of your sexuality. Homosexual is just your sexual inclinations. And the Catholic clergy, I know for a fact for myself that part of the reason I was attracted towards the Catholic clergy and the monasticism was because nobody was going to ask any questions about why I'm not married.
Yeah.
And a lot of people go into it, I think, because they think that nobody's going to ask questions. And then many of them either act out secretively, or, you know, in seminaries or in monasteries. And yet, on the one hand, they're having to maintain the Catholic doctrine and dogmas, yet at the same time dealing with this tremendous feelings of guilt of having to be honest about their own feelings and their own sexual identity.
And so, were you struggling with your identity at all while you were in?
Well,
in
I was very, very lucky. When I was a novice in the monastery, we had a monk from another monastery come to give our community retreat, and I shared with him about some of my feelings, and he really helped me enormously to come to terms with being a gay man. Within Catholicism, that is done within what they call the internal forum. In other words, you can say these things behind closed doors on a one-to-one basis that you can't say from the pulpit. And I was very, very lucky as a young monk to have he later became my spiritual director and was a wonderful, wonderful man, long since dead. But he helped me enormously to come to terms with being gay and being a monk and being a priest and all that type of thing.
Yeah, there's an interesting book. I don't know if you've heard it or maybe you've read it. It's called In the Closet of the Vatican. It came out about 5-6 years ago by, I believe, a French journalist. And he talks about how pretty much 80% of the church hierarchy are homosexuals. But, you know, the old guard who came of age before the sexual revolution in the 60s, you know, they kind of, like you said, like you make the distinction between gay and homosexual. They might be homosexual, but they're certainly not gay. That they're
Exactly.
they're very much the Catholic doctrine that it's a sin. It might be a part of themselves, but it's something that they lock away, even though they know that they're gay. They mentioned, but there's a difference, and maybe you've experienced this as well, that the priests of the younger generation who came of age following the sexual revolution tend to be very much more open about their sexual identity than the old guard, and the old guard is dying off. One of the points he made, it was really interesting, was that because the hierarchy are all homosexuals, they then, when they're reaching down, like the novice priest to then promote to bishops, they're then promoting someone from their own team, right? That they're the nuncios, the bishops, archbishops, they are picking the young priests who are gay to be promoted up to bishop, to sort of, it's like a self-sustaining boys club, literally. So.
Well, on that, you know, when somebody is going to be considered for the episcopate, they send around questionnaires to everybody who knows them to test their orthodoxy. And if they don't come high up on the orthodoxy scale, they're just not going to get to become a bishop. But what that leads to is a lot of doublethink. An awful lot of the clergy are personally, they have one set of ideas, but publicly they have another. And it requires them to... now, I think that I'm not quite sure that 80% of the clergy are gay, or homosexual, but it's a very high percentage. But it requires an awful lot of mental gymnastics. And people, I've been with clergy who, one moment they can be screaming queens with a gin and tonic in their hands, and then they get up in the pulpit and denounce gay people and denounce gay adoptions and gay marriage, and so it requires an awful lot of emotional and mental gymnastics.
It sounds like quite a conflict.
A lot of conflict.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, I've made that point as well. You also mentioned earlier about like theologically painting yourself in a corner. That is an analogy I have used in the past. I will use it again in the future. And the same point you just made, that the hypocrisy is just, it's bizarre that you can get up in the pulpit and say one thing and in your private life it's just mind-boggling. So, okay, so both Ken and John have talked about having partners. So, Scott, you haven't mentioned, did you have a partner who's a believer before you left the church?
I did. When I went to school in 1980, I met my now wife just a few years before school started. So we've been married a little over 40 years already. So, so we both were in the church. She had actually grown up as a Seventh-day Adventist. I did not. And I don't think she was planning on having any doubts whatsoever, but she may have. But when I started to pull away and leave, there's that obvious conflict, between a spouse. And I think a lot of TCP members go through this, they have to leave, but then they also you have to tell your spouse. They run the risk of losing their families. Many of them do. But anyway, so she followed me, I think, by about a couple of years. So now we can have some really just, good open discussions on religion and such. I think if she misses anything, like a lot of us do, you miss that social aspect of it.
But she's not a believer anymore.
She's not a believer anymore. I don't know if I wouldn't say that she's a technically an atheist. There's kind of a fine line there, but she definitely recognizes how bizarre Christian beliefs are. So she's a rational thinker now. Yeah.
The three of you then came through this fairly unscathed then. Like Ken and Scott, and John, you were already out. Scott, you were on your way out, or Ken, you were on your way out too. But all three of you had somebody in your life who stood by you, who didn't say, hey, I can't be with somebody who doesn't believe. So you guys were lucky in that sense.
That's probably true. Yeah.
Ken, you had a supportive wife who still believes. Scott, yours who doesn't believe. But John, I presume your partner doesn't believe either.
He is Asian, and he's sort of nominally Buddhist type, Asian religion type of thing, but not an active believer. No.
Yeah. But Buddhist tends to be much more philosophical than like a practical application of a religion like the Abrahamic faiths are. So
that's correct.
So, yeah. Okay. All right. Well, it's been a great discussion. And any final points you guys would like to make? Some interesting, maybe somebody who's out there struggling. Some words of wisdom you can impart.
I would just encourage clergy that are out there to look at the Clergy Project, look it up online, search it out, see what they can find out, because it's a great resource, and that would be my recommendation.
Yeah, and John, any parting thoughts?
You're not alone. We are a community. We support one another, and there will be people. There is life beyond faith.
Thank you.
And it's a good Ken, life.
Final parting thought?
What they said.
Great. Okay. Well, I really appreciate you guys coming on and sharing your journey with us, and hopefully people watching have gotten something out of this. If you are a member of the clergy and you are questioning, then please, by all means, check out the Clergy Project. As John mentioned, there are screening procedures in place to prevent infiltration of people who are trying to find out who the people are, especially the ones who are in active ministry. But if you are questioning, there is help out there. There are support systems available, and you have a whole community of people out there. So please check out the Clergy Project, as Scott suggested. Check out their website if you need some help. So we'd like to wrap up. I'd like to thank Ken, John, and Scott for joining us and sharing with us their stories. I really appreciate it, and hopefully it is helpful to some of you out there. So I'd like to remind everyone to please like and subscribe. Thank you for joining us, and we'll see everybody on the next episode. Take care. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Jason. Nice meeting you guys.
Thanks, guys.
Okay, thanks for listening, and don't forget we're on YouTube, so follow us on YouTube. Just search for Atheist Alliance International, and please subscribe and hit that notification bell. We're also on all of your favourite podcast platforms, so make sure that you follow us on there as well. See you next time.